All right, what's going on, everyone? Seth here, registered dietitian. And sports nutrition and sports science has really come a long way in the last few decades. Athletes are bigger, they're stronger, they're faster, they're leaner than ever before. But I thought it would be interesting to go back in time and look at some of the pioneers who forged the path to get to where we are today, specifically the golden era of bodybuilding. And who better to look at than poster child for that era himself, the Austrian Oak, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Let's dive in and see what we can learn about Arnold's nutrition, how he approached things, and what are some takeaways that we can learn from. Now, Arnold came to the United States in 1968 at the young age of 21, being brought over by bodybuilding pioneer Joe Weider, who clearly saw Arnold's potential in bodybuilding. But that potential was a little rough around the edges. Arnold competed in his first show in the States just days after arriving in the 1968 Universe down in Miami. He was 240 pounds and massive, but he ended up losing the competition to a much smaller Frank Zane. Zane was 50 pounds lighter than Arnold, but much more chiseled, leaner, and more symmetrical. That was a valuable lesson for Arnold to learn early on, and I think really helped him get better. But let's back up. I mentioned Arnold was 240 pounds already at the age of 21. How did he get that massive at such an early age? What did he eat? Well, interestingly, Arnold called his diet in the early days the garbage disposal diet. I think we would call it a dirty bulk today, but basically he ate anything and everything he could to pack in the calories and put on size. Now, Arnold was from Austria, so some of the food items were a little unique. Arnold ate a lot of Wiener Schnitzel, pork chops, German potato salad, dense rye breads, a lot of whole milk, whole cottage cheese. These types of foods were very calorically dense and helped him get the calories he needed to continue fueling his marathon training sessions and still pack on size. Arnold ate an estimated 3,500 to 5,000 calories per day during this period. So after losing the Universe to Frank Zane and seeing how lean and chiseled the USA competitors were, Arnold knew he had to make some changes. So he learned about what they ate and how they approached their diet, and he pretty quickly adopted that strategy. He cut out the heavy cream, heavy milk, the schnitzels, the bratwurst, and instead focused on lean proteins, smaller, more frequent meals to reduce bloating, and more complex carbs like potatoes and brown rice to fuel his training session. This is a lot more like what we see bodybuilders eating today. And it's reported that Arnold aimed for a 40-40-20 split when it came to his macros. So 40% protein, 40% carbs, and 20% fats. Now, you might have heard Arnold mention before that he's recommended eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and I just said he aimed for a 40-40-20 split with his macros. But we should take that with a grain of salt because nutrition labels didn't exist back in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't until the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act of 1990 came out that we even had labels on our food like we know today. Back in those days, if you were a bodybuilder and wanted to know what was in a food, you would have to get your hands on a USDA or agricultural handbook that had compositions of foods in them. One nice thing about nutrition back in the 70s is that most foods were single ingredient or whole foods, so it was a lot easier to have standardized textbooks to give you this nutrition information. Today, food labels contain 50 ingredients that you can't even pronounce, and it makes it much more difficult to know exactly what you're eating. So did Arnold meticulously track his nutrition and hit these numbers every day? Not exactly. He more so relied on the scale, his intuition, and what the mirror said to alter his nutrition and try to dial in for a competition. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention supplements and specifically protein powder. It did exist back in the 70s, but not quite the way it does today. There was no whey protein, which digests very easy and can be made to taste pretty good. Back then, the powders were comprised of calcium caseinate and soluble dried egg whites. It was unflavored and meant to be mixed with whole milk. It was gritty, tasteless, really hard to mix, and not a particularly pleasant experience. Now, Arnold did drink these shakes some, reportedly filling them full of things like honey and fruits just to make them palatable so he could get them down. But primarily, protein shakes back in the 70s were used to sell supplements for Joe Weider and the magazines, which framed it as though Arnold got a significant portion of his calories from these supplements, and they were integral to his physique. Now, if we fast forward to today, Arnold's diet looks a lot lot different. Following multiple open heart surgeries, Arnold follows mostly a plant-based diet on the advice from his doctors to keep his LDL cholesterol to a minimum. Arnold is on record saying if he could go back in time, he would have approached his nutrition differently, knowing what he does today. It would have been interesting to see to what extent, if any, that affected his physique, his 7 Olympia titles, or his legacy overall. But anyway, that's going to wrap up this breakdown. If you enjoyed it or found some value in it, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.